This is part 37 of Good Omens. The guard on the hole in the fence looked puzzled. He was aware of excitement back in the base, and his radio seemed to be picking up nothing but static, and his eyes were being drawn again and again to the card in front of him. He'd seen many identity cards in his time, military, CIA, FBI, KGB even, and being a young soldier, he had yet to grasp that the more insignificant an organization is, the more impressive are its identity cards. This one was hellishly impressive. His lips moved as he read it again, all the way from the Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of Britain charges and demands, through the bit about commandeering all kindling rope and igniferous oils, right down to the signature of the WA's First Lord Adjunct, praise him all ye works of the Lord, and fly fornication Smith. Newt kept his thumb over the bit about 9p per witch, and tried to look like James Bond. Finally, the guard's probing intellect found a word he thought he recognized. "What's this here?" he said suspiciously. "About us giving you..." It says the F slur, but I'm not gonna say that. "Oh, we have to have them," said Newt. "We burn them." "Say what?" "We burn them." The guard's face broadened into a grin, and they told him England was soft. "Right on," he said. Something pressed into the small of his back. "Drop your gun," said Anathema behind him, "or I shall regret what I shall have to do next." Well, it's true, she thought as she saw the man stiffen in terror. If he doesn't drop the gun, he'll find out that this is a stick, and I shall really regret having to be shot. At the main gate, Sergeant Thomas A. Dessenberger was also having problems. A little man in a dirty mac kept pointing a finger at him and muttering, while a lady who looked slightly like his mother talked to him in urgent tones and kept interrupting herself in a different voice. "It really is vitally important that we are allowed to speak to whoever is in charge," said Aziraphale. "I really must ask you that. He's right, you know. I'd be able to tell if he was lying. Yes, thank you. I think we'd really achieve something if you kindly allowed me to carry on." "All right. Thank you." "I was only trying to put in a good word." "Yes, you were asking him to..." "Yes, all right. Now, do you see my finger?" shouted Shadwell, whose sanity was still attached to him, but only on the end of a long and rather frayed string. "Do you see it? This finger, laddie, can send ye to meet your Maker." Sergeant Dessenberg stared at the black and purple nail a few inches from his face. As an offensive weapon, it rated quite highly, especially if it were used in the preparation of food. The telephone gave him nothing but static. He'd been told not to leave his post. His wound from Nam was starting to play up. He slipped and fallen in a hotel shower when he took a holiday there in 1983. Now the mere sight of a bar of yellow soap could send him into near-fatal flashbacks. He wondered how much trouble he could get into for shooting non-American civilians. The 4 bicycles pulled up a little way from the base. Tire marks in the dust and a patch of oil indicated that other travelers had briefly rested there. "What are we stopping for?" said Pepper. "I'm thinking," said Adam. It was hard. The bit in his mind that he knew was himself was still there, but it was trying to stay afloat on a fountain of tumultuous darkness. What he was afraid of, though, was that his 3 companions were 100% human. He'd got them into trouble before in the way of torn clothes, docked pocket money, and so on, but this one was almost certainly going to involve a lot more than being confined to the house and made to tidy up your room. On the other hand, there wasn't anyone else. "All right," he said, "we need some stuff, I think. We need a sword, a crown, and some scales." They stared at him. "What, just here?" said Brian. "There's nothing like that here." "I don't know," said Adam. "When you think about the games and that, we've played." Just to make Sergeant Dessenberger's day, a car pulled up, and it was floating several inches off the ground because it had no tires or paintwork. What it did have was a trail of blue smoke, and when it stopped, it made the ping noises made by metal cooling from a very high temperature. It looked as if it had smoked glass windows, although this was from an effect caused by having ordinary glass windows but a smoke-filled interior. The driver's door opened and a cloud of choking fumes got out. Then Crawley followed it. He waved the smoke away from his face, blinked, and then turned the gesture into a friendly wave. "Hi," he said. "How's it going? Has the world ended yet?" "He won't let us in, Crowley," said Madame Tracy. "Aziraphale, is that you? Nice dress," said Crowley vaguely. He wasn't feeling very well. For the last 30 minutes he had been imagining that a ton of burning metal, rubber, and leather was a fully functioning automobile, and the Bentley had been resisting him fiercely. The hard part had been to keep the whole thing rolling around the all-weather the whole thing rolling after the all-weather radials had burned away. Beside him, the remains of the Bentley dropped suddenly onto its distorted wheel rims as he stopped imagining that it had tires. He patted a metal surface hot enough to fry eggs on. "You wouldn't get that sort of performance out of one of these modern cars," he said lovingly. They stared at him. There was a little electronic click. The gate was rising. The housing that contained the electric motor gave a mechanical groan, and then gave up in the face of the unstoppable force acting on the barrier. "Hey," said Sergeant Dessenberger. "Which one of you yoo-hoos did that?" Zip, 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 and a small dog, its legs a blur. They stared at the 4 ferociously pedaling figures that ducked behind the barrier and disappeared into the camp. The sergeant pulled himself together. "Hey," he said, but much more weakly this time. "They of them kids have some space alien with a face like a friendly turd in a break basket?" Don't think so, said Crowley. "Then," said Sergeant Dessenberger, "they're in real trouble." He raised his gun. Enough of this pussyfooting around. He kept thinking of soap. "And so," he said, "are you?" "I warned ye," Shadwell began. "This has gone on too long," said Aziraphale. "Short it out, Crowley. There's a dear chap." said Crowley. "I'm the nice one," said Aziraphale. "You can't expect me to—" "Oh, blast it! You try to do the decent thing, and where does it get you?" He snapped his fingers. There was a pop like an old-fashioned flashbulb, and Sergeant Thomas A. Dessenberger disappeared. Said Aziraphale. "See," said Shadwell, who hadn't quite got the hang of Madame Tracy's split personality. "Nothing to it. Ye stick by me, you'll be all right." "Well done," said Crowley. "Never thought you had it in you." "No," said Aziraphale, "nor did I, in fact. I do hope I haven't sent him someplace dreadful." You'd better get used to it right now," said Crowley. "You just send 'em. Best not to worry about where they go." He looked fascinated. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your new body?" "Oh, yes, of course. Madame Tracy, this is Crowley. Crowley, Madame Tracy." "Charmed, I'm sure." "Let's get on with it," said Crowley. He looked sadly at the wreckage of the Bentley, and then brightened. A jeep was heading purposely towards the gate, and it looked as though it was crowded with people who were about to shout questions and fire guns and not worry about which order they did this in. He brightened up. This was more what you would call his area of competence. He took his hands out of his pockets and he raised them like Bruce Lee, and then he smiled like Lee Van Cleef. "Ah," he said, "here comes transport." They parked their bikes outside one of the low buildings. Wensleydale locked his. He was that kind of boy. "So, what will these people look like?" said Pepper. "They could look like all sorts," said Adam doubtfully. "They're grown-ups, are they?" said Pepper. "Yes," said Adam. "More grown-up than you've ever seen before, I reckon." "Fighting grown-ups is never any use," said Wensleydale gloomily. "You always get into trouble." "You don't have to fight them," said Adam. "You just do what I told you." The them looked at the things they were carrying. As far as tools to mend the world were concerned, they did not look incredibly efficient. "How are we going to find him, then?" said Brian doubtfully. "I remember when we came to the open day. It's all rooms and stuff. Lots of rooms and flashing lights." Adam stared thoughtfully at the buildings. The alarms were still yodeling. "Well," he said, "it seems to me— Hey, what are you kids doing here?" It wasn't a 100% threatening voice, but it was near the end of its tether, and it belonged to an officer who'd spent 10 minutes trying to make sense of a senseless world where alarms went off and doors didn't open. Two equally harassed soldiers stood behind him, slightly at a loss as to how to deal with 4 short and clearly Caucasian juveniles, one of them marginally female. "Don't you worry about us," said Adam airily. "We're just looking around." "Now you just—" the lieutenant began. "Go to sleep," said Adam. "You just go to sleep. All you soldiers here go to sleep. Then you won't get hurt. You all just go to sleep. Now." The lieutenant stared at him, his eyes trying to focus. Then he pitched forward. "Coo," said Pepper as the other collapsed. "How did you do that?" Well, said Adam cautiously, you know that bit about hypnotism in the Day's Own book of 101 Things to Do that we could never make work? Yes. Well, it's sort of like that, only now I found how to do it. He turned back to the communications building. He pulled himself together, his body unfolding from its habitual comfortable slouch into an upright bearing Mr. Tyler would have been proud of. Right, he said. He thought for a while. Then he said, come and see. If you took the world away and just left the electricity, it would look like the most exquisite filigree ever made, a ball of twinkling silver lines with the occasional coruscating spike of a satellite beam. Even the dark areas would glow with radar and commercial radio waves. It would be the nervous system of a great beast. Here and there cities make knots in the web, but most of the electricity is, as it were, mere musculature concerned only with crude work. But for 50 years or so, people have been giving electricity brains. And now it was alive, in the same way that fire is alive. Switches were welding shut, relays fused, and the heart of silicone chips whose microscopic architecture looked like a street plan of Los Angeles. Fresh pathways opened up, and hundreds of miles away, bells rang in underground rooms, and men stared in horror at what curtain screens were telling them. Heavy steel doors shut firmly in secret hollow mountains, leaving people on the other side to pound on them and wrestle with fuse boxes which had melted. Bits of dessert and tundra slid aside, letting fresh air into air-conditioned tombs, and blunt shapes ground ponderously into position. And while it flowed where it should not, it ebbed from its normal beds. In cities the traffic lights went, then the street lights, then all the lights. Cooling fans slowed, flickered, and stopped. Heaters faded into darkness. Lifts stuck. Radio stations choked off, their soothing music silenced. It had been said that civilization is 24 hours and 2 meals away from barbarianism. Night was spreading slowly around the spinning earth. It should have been full of pinpricks of light. It was not. There were 5 billion people down there. What was going to happen soon would make barbarianism look like a picnic, hot, nasty, and eventually given over to the ants. Death straightened up. He appeared to be listening intently. It was anyone's guess what he was listening to. It was anyone's guess what he listened with. He is here, he said. The other 3 looked up. There was a barely perceptible change in the way they stood there. A moment before Death had spoken, they, the part of them that did not walk and talk like human beings, had been wrapped around the world. Now they were back, more or less. There was a strangeness about them. It was as if, instead of ill-fitting suits, they now had ill-fitting bodies. Famine looked as though he had been tuned slightly off station, so that the hitherto dominant signal of a pleasant, thrusting, successful businessman was beginning to be drowned out by the ancient, horrible static of his basic personality. War's skin glistened with sweat. Lucian's skin just glistened. It's all taken care of, said War, speaking with some effort. It'll take its course. It's not just the nuclear pollution, said. It's the chemical. Thousands of gallons of stuff in little tanks all over the world. Beautiful liquids, with 18 syllables in their name. And the old standbys. Say whatever you like. Plutonium may give you grief for thousands of years, but arsenic is forever. And then, winter, said Famine. I like winter. There's something clean about winter. Chickens coming home to roost, said War. No more chickens, said Famine flatly. Only Death hadn't changed. Some things don't. The 4 left the building. It was noticeable after pollution, while still walking, nevertheless gave the impression of oozing. And this was noticed by Anathema Newton Pulsifer. It had been the first building they'd come to, and had seemed much safer inside than out, where there seemed to be a lot of excitement. Anathema had pushed open a door covered in signs that suggested that this would be a terminally dangerous thing to do. It swung open at her touch. When they'd gone inside, it had shut and locked itself. There hadn't been a lot of time to discuss this after the 4 had walked in. What were they, said Newt? Some kind of terrorist? In a very nice and accurate sense, said Anathema. I think you're right. What was all their weird talk about? I think possibly the end of the world, said Anathema. Did you see their auras? I don't think so, said Newt. Not nice at all. Oh, negative auras, in fact. Oh? Like black holes. That's bad, isn't it? Yes. Anathema glared at the rows of metal cabinets. For once, just now, because it wasn't just for play but was for real, the machinery that was going to bring about the end of the world, or at least that part that occupied the layers between the 2 meters down and all the way to the ozone layer, wasn't operating according to the usual script. There were no big red canisters with flashing lights. There were no coiled wires with a cut-me look about them. No suspiciously large numeric displays were counting down toward a zero that could be averted with seconds to spare. Instead, the metal cabinets looked solid and heavy and very resistant to last-minute heroism. "What takes its course?" said Anathema. "They've done something, haven't they?" "Perhaps there's an off switch," said Newt helplessly. "I'm sure if we looked around." "These sort of things are wired in. Don't be silly. I thought you knew about this sort of thing." Newt nodded desperately. This was a long way from the pages of Easy Electronics. For the look of the thing, he peered into the back of one of the cabinets. "Worldwide communications," he said indistinctively. You could do practically anything. Modulate the main power, tap into satellites, absolutely anything. You could zip, ouch, make things do zip, just about zip. Oh. How are you getting on in there? Newt sucked his fingers. So far he hadn't found anything that resembled a transitor. He wrapped his hand in his handkerchief and pulled a couple of boards out of their sockets. Once, one of the electronics magazines to which he subscribed had published a joke circuit which was guaranteed not to work. At least, they'd said in an amusing way, "Here's something all you ham-fisted hams out there can build in the certain knowledge that if it does nothing, it's working." It had diodes the wrong way around, transistors upside down, and a flat battery. Newt had built it, and it picked up Radio Moscow. He'd written them a letter of complaint, but they never replied. "I really don't know if I'm doing any good," he said. "James Bond just unscrews things," said Anathema. "Not just unscrews," said Newt, his temper fraying, "and I'm not James Bond. If I was, the bad guys would have shown me all the Megadeth levers, and told me how they bloody well worked, wouldn't they? Not only it doesn't happen like that in real life. I don't know what's happening, and I can't stop it."